Anyway, thank you for joining us. The 1 o'clock session here on Wednesday. We have a great team put together by the guys at Kount for this panel, and it should be a very intriguing look at data privacy, at fraud, and how to protect your consumer experience. So, first off, we, as always, will hear from Pacific Media Technologies, our education session sponsor.
Our team is bar none. I mean, together as a family, pretty much, family niche.
You've got people that are easy to talk to. They don't mind if you come to them with problems. They're easy to work with.
I'm happy working with my coworkers, and I can't wait to get here.
They deliver work that they're proud of, and it shows.
Pacific Media Technologies. Technology driven, quality guaranteed.
So again, thank you to PMT for your support of the education. This title of this session is a mouthful. You can read it yourself. Shane Allor from Kount is our moderator. Got a great group again. Greg, welcome back to the stage for the second time in 2 days. And take it away. Thanks, guys.
Sweet. Yeah, thanks, everyone. And as Tom said, the other part of this discussion is going to be how can folks like yourself use this data to grow revenue stream, right? Maybe potentially new ones as well. So obviously he also said it's kind of a mouthful from a title standpoint, but really when we talk about first party data, it's, well, what the heck is it, right? So I think first, I want to make sure that everyone knows what it is, kind of how you operates and how do you use it, right? So I guess to start things off, Matt, like maybe high level, what first party data is and what it means.
So probably, everyone hear me all right? Sounds like you can. There's really kind of 4 types of data that exist in the world, particularly with respect to marketing and e-commerce. First-party data is one of those 4. First-party data is data that you collect or you own on your prospects or your customers. So imagine you have a website, a digital experience. Your clients, your prospects show up on that website. They're engaging in all sorts of behaviors. That's your data. That's first-party data. If you have a CRM database where you send emails to your clients, your prospects, your customers, that's first-party data. So it is data that you, as an organization, as a business, owns on your customers and your prospects. There's other types, but first-party data is a very powerful data source because you own it and you have the opportunity to leverage that data as a strategic asset and use it to drive better experiences for your prospects and your customers.
And I think too, it's a perfect segue, more of setting the stage of what it is now. And my perspective, as well as Alex's perspective, is, hey, we've been collecting this sort of data for so long, being at Kount, but through the lens of fraud prevention, right? So it's always been, let's catch the bad guys, and here's how we do it with this sort of data. But now it's, hey, if we can stop them, well, gosh, there's a bucket of these customers that are actually good. Now we can utilize that, recognize what they look like, and we can now start to do more targets to those good customers. And I mean, Alex, you tell me. I mean, how repurposing it? We have the data. It's just a matter of how we do it now, right? So.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah. They'll turn it on and off.
Yeah. So I agree. I think one of the really interesting parts that I've seen in the last year or so has been as first-party data and customization of experience has increased and the need for that has increased. Kount has come in to a very interesting space where we are doing all of that first-party data collection as well. So the way to catch a fraudster, the same way to detect an individual who has high risk associated with them or a transaction that has high risk associated with it, is a very similar process to that first-party data collection that marketers want to do for a personalization of an experience or a tailored campaign, even just consumer insights in its entirety. So we need to know, even down to a SKU level data, we need to know, well, what products do you have? What products are you selling that are going to be high risk? Well, that can be very similar to, well, what products are in high demand right now? A coupon code, even down to a coupon code. When you're running a marketing campaign or some type of coupon or trade promotion, it's very, very similar to, and that can be a very high risk event, but all of that data, we need to collect thousands and thousands of data points on that device, on the transaction itself, to get to that state where we can say, yeah, this is not only is this in the past a bad transaction, let's decline it, but this is a good transaction, this is a very good customer. How can we create more lookalike models like this? How can we go and activate new customers who look exactly like this individual who, so it's really just an inverse, this is how I'd look at it. It's an inverse, it's the same data, it's the same process, it's just a different way to look at it from that first party data collection standpoint.
100%.
Yep.
100%. And I'd be curious too, for Greg, from your perspective, being more so closely tied with merchants as well as on the platform, like your perspective on that.
Yeah, so what I found is the more sophisticated the marketer is, the bigger the company, the more they understand data in general, but certainly their customers, the more interested they are in first-party data. The ones that are just, hey, I have something to sell and I'm trying to sell it to as many people as I can, and that's it. They don't understand the value of having that kind of data, and they're also not looking at that data to make their media spend more efficient, to be able to understand their customers more. So for example, if you're a D2C company, you're selling a product and you're selling it out in the public, if you're on Amazon, right, not quite D2C, but you're selling it, through Amazon, you don't really know anything about those customers. They're not your customers, they're Amazon's customers. And you, as a marketer, are at a disadvantage for that, right? So just like somebody walking down the aisles of Walmart, it's wonderful to have your product on the shelves of Walmart. Everybody would want that. But when that customer takes it off the shelf and they buy it, they are Walmart's customer. They're not yours. You don't know their name, you don't know their address, you don't know anything about them or even why they bought it. So your knowledge of that customer in a retail environment, and with Amazon to a degree, is very limited, right? So if you're trying to do marketing, if you're trying to understand your customer base, you have far fewer data points than you would have with a true D2C campaign. So take that the next step. You have your own site. You have a site up on Shopify, and you're collecting customer information. What do you know? Okay, well, you know that this person lives at this address. You know their you know their name. You know their address. You know what they bought, thus kind of what they are interested in because that's what they bought. You might know what they added to their cart and what they took off, right? So you have some data points that are available to you, but not a ton. Right? You just know this because the obvious things to buy a product and ship that product out. Wouldn't it be valuable to know, I don't know, gender? Maybe you could deduce it from the name. But what if you find out 95% of your customers aren't actually men, it's their wives buying it for their husbands? Okay, well, as a media buyer, right, somebody paying for Google ads and Facebook ads, that would drastically change your message. It would drastically change the audience that you're buying. So what I find, sorry, super long answer, is that the more sophisticated the marketer, the more they tap into first-party data. How's that?
Awesome. Yeah, no, that was great. Obviously it's data, right? Like the more data, the better. But again, how do we contextualize it? How do we understand it? There's obviously going to be some technology behind it. So Matt, care to share some examples of how to really supercharge it with technology?
Yeah. So, I come from the marketing and customer engagement side, and we work a lot with all of the Fortune 500 and even sophisticated marketers. You still need to ground them in what is the purpose of this particular data and how are you going to use it to change something about the experience, about the price, about the navigation on your website, about the message, to Greg's point, if you know some demographic information. So start there, give your data assets, your first-party data assets, sort of a teleological purpose, a reason to live and exist in the world. And then you can start to think about what's the technology ecosystem around that data that you have to have in place and orchestrate it in the right way to drive a better experience. So, give you a very specific, example. If you've got an e-commerce digital presence where people are buying things, and someone, you want to run a abandoned cart campaign because they put something in their shopping cart but didn't complete the purchase, and you want to do that in a different channel, different marketing channel, let's say email, you have to make sure that your digital presence, your digital property is connected to your CRM system, your email system that you're using to deploy those communications. So you can target them with that abandoned cart message. Well, you got to think, well, has this person authenticated? Have they signed in, and do I know who they are? If not, how do I leverage, site tracking cookies and pixels to identify who people are? So kind of work through the entire chain of events where you go from collecting that data and then thinking about the technical ecosystem that needs to be around it. But for many of our clients, they think about technical platforms around the marketing communication channels that they own. So they think about, I need an SMS platform, I need an email platform, I need the ability to do retargeting on my website. So that's some kind of Adobe platform, typically, or Salesforce platform. So those are the kind of the key platforms, the key technical aspects of the ecosystem that need to be in place. But don't put those aspects of the ecosystem in place before you've clearly identified those high-value use cases and how you're going to use data to show up differently and activate that data with your prospects and with your customers. And then, of course, in the 21st century, and given all of the regulation around how data is being used, particularly from a privacy and consent standpoint, making sure that you have the right governance framework for that data and the right legal regime around that data so it can be collected properly and people's identities are kept private if that's necessary, but also the ability to sort of trace through how that data is being used, because with laws, like the California data protection laws and others that are on the way, things like data transparency, letting your consumers know what data you've collected on them, so making sure that's part of the ecosystem as well. So thinking through those use cases and then building the technical platforms that are going to serve the ends of those particular use cases, always thinking about the human being that you're trying to influence with that data and how can you use technology to do that.
Sweet.
Can I add on that?
Yeah, go for it.
So I love the start of what you said was you have all this data, but you can't get lost in the data. It's like in my head, I almost imagine there's somebody there in an Excel doc looking at all these little data points and thinking, aha, the average age is 37.8. But at the end of the day, it's not about that. I mean, any marketing, anybody who's listening to this, they're marketers, and that's a very human thing, right? It's trying to convey your message in a story and get somebody to engage and purchase that product. So the paralysis by analysis for this stuff, especially when you get more and more data that can come out, can absolutely just cripple you, right, in terms of just making good business decisions. At the end of the day, it's marketing, right? You just want you want to get your message out to the right people, which to me is the big thing about first-party data. It's about you can better identify who you should be speaking with, no matter what you do. If you're doing lead gen, you're doing e-commerce, it genuinely doesn't, or college, right, you're a college recruiter. You want to speak to the people and get your message in front of the right people. You don't want to blast it out to 1 million people and have nearly all of them not interested. You'd rather talk to the 100 people that genuinely care about what your message is. It's not only more cost efficient, right, but you just get better results. So at the end of the day, all of this comes down to, can you make a good business decision as a marketer, right? So that's one thing I wanted to add. The second thing is about the regulation side of it, and it might have been you who said that yesterday, that CCPA, the California, is already, there are 2 other states that are about to implement it as well, right? So that whole regulation it's real, right? Sometimes there are laws you think, that won't really touch me, but when you're out there and you're doing e-commerce, you're affected by it. I mean, we get daily requests from customers that are delete my information. People are really putting those out there saying delete my info, and you have to delete it. This is not, I'll get around to that. I mean, you'll get sued for it, and the fines are significant. And as he was talking through the different technology where you have a website collecting an email address and that goes into your CRM, so maybe you're using Klaviyo, you're using MailChimp or Constant Contact or Salesforce something, or HubSpot. If you want to test out SMS and maybe the platform you're using doesn't support it, so you want to kind of bolt on this SMS platform, well, that's another place that data is going. So now if somebody says delete my data and you forgot that it also got exported over to this thing because you were just testing it out for a few weeks to see if it worked for your campaign, you can get in trouble for that. So now that we're dealing with the regulations that come with this, is that you have to keep an eye on things. So you say the bigger companies, it's a governance, board. Most everyday people, that are just running Facebook campaigns, they don't have that, but they can't ignore it. You can't say, I don't have a governance board, so I don't care. It's real.
You're right, and I would add to that too, because when you're starting to leverage first-party data, and I'm having a lot of conversations with this now, because some of these fraud teams are coming and saying, we have 10, 15 years worth of data on certain organizations. And then we go to the marketing teams and they're saying, oh, we didn't know you have this data. We want to leverage it for everything that was just discussed. But when they start taking over ownership of that data, from the very beginning, compliance needs to be at the forefront, especially because since this is getting so expansive in these regulations, it's clear that it's moving more and more towards a universal compliance standard. I think we spoke about that yesterday too. So the minute that you're moving towards, okay, well, we're going to be leveraging first-party data at scale, the second point of that almost immediately has to be, okay, well, how can we make sure that we're compliant for right to be forgotten? Or even GDPR, right? I mean, GDPR, CCPA, everything that you're covering, if you're doing business anywhere in the UK, anywhere in Europe, you need to start looking at your first-party data strategy from a compliance standard as well.
And I think at one point you said, if you're dealing with first-party data, we're all dealing with it. You have first-party data. There's no getting out of it. If you have customers, you have first-party data.
Correct.
If that customer says, delete my information, or what's the official term? It was
right to be
forgotten.
Yep.
Guess what? That Excel doc that you have sitting on your desktop that you just happened to download last week's orders so you could eyeball some data, their information is in that, and you must delete it. Because if by accident, 2 years later, you start some new brand, right? You're like, hey, I'm gonna try this other one. I got my old customers, and you forgot about this one, right? You forgot that this person said, I delete my data. You're on the hook for that, right? It's a different world than it was, literally months ago. It's just the level of compliance that you have it's real.
And a final point on that from me is, Greg mentioned something. You wanted to go from email to SMS, and I use that as an example as well. But as you start to build out these technical ecosystems, of course, the regulatory regime that needs to be around it and compliance, but also thinking about how you link individuals across those systems.
Yeah.
That's the big challenge, because the way I show up in an email database, that information is not in your SMS database. Yeah. So if I don't have the mobile phone number attached to my email address and also in that SMS database, great, I can do the linkage, but that doesn't always happen. In fact, it usually doesn't happen. So kind of thinking about, well, if I've got this technical ecosystem, how do I stitch it together where all of these different IDs exist on individuals and on consumers, so I can actually connect to them in a different channel and know who they are across devices, across platforms, across multiple different purchases that might be happening within a household where you're trying to identify, is it the husband or is it the wife? To that this whole hierarchy of identification that needs to happen is something to be thoughtful about as well as you're starting to think about how you activate first-party data.
Yeah, and that's something that we've done on the Kount side to tie into my first point around how fraud and marketing are so aligned with each other, is to be able to identify an individual from a fraud perspective, you need to be very, very good at linking on a lot of pieces of PII. Phone number, name, email, address, payment token, location, right? Where is this coming from? If you have a really good, what in the marketing space would be an identity graph, but on the fraud side is much more of a persona and a fraud identity. Leveraging and being able to connect those disparate sources together to say, well, we know that this individual just changed their email 4 times, but it's still coming from the same device. Well, we can decline them now because it's fraudulent. We know that it's a high-risk transaction. But from a marketing perspective, that same link analysis can be critical to say, okay, well, yeah, we know that now this household, instead of just individuals, is really into buying, some type of video game or this type of vertical or this type of CPG or consumer packaged good. So we can link together and see a lot of that, and it's a really beneficial thing today. I mean, it's a key point when people are coming and they have 3 or 4 disparate data systems, and they have no idea who their consumers are across those 3.
Yeah. We call it customer 360. So you have that 360-degree view, and it's, I say to my clients, if you can get to 180, if you can get to 270, that's pretty good. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but kind of that notion of that 360-degree view of your prospects and customers is very powerful from either a fraud perspective, but also from a marketing perspective.
And then, too, I mean, again, the customer is trying to tell you the story, right? You just got to figure it out with the data, correct? So it's one, hey, you got it. Now it's let's take it, let's ingest it. And then 3, you guys and you all in the room, it's, well, gosh, how do we align with the market dynamics? Like COVID, that shifted a bunch. From a good customer to a bad customer, completely shifted what those different buckets look like, right? So like, how do you guys align, or what are your thoughts on aligning to different market dynamics when it comes from compliance and then market in general, like COVID, for example, things like that?
From our perspective, particularly from the marketing side of things, we want to be able to leverage that data and react to it with more than one strategy or tactic. So from a marketing perspective, we might see data. Oh, this is a high-value customer, and so we want to treat them a bit differently, and so maybe we have a different offer in the email. But we were working with a lot of automotive clients during the pandemic and the subsequent supply chain shortage, and we were working with them to understand market dynamics and customer behavior, looking at how different parts of the country were opening up and different demand for vehicles based upon website browsing behavior. People, scheduling test drives, for example, people configuring a new vehicle, looking to see what incentives were in market. But that behavior was very disparate across the country because the country was opening up at a different rate, and the pandemic kind of came in waves across different parts of the country. So we looked at that data, and we're working with our marketing clients and said, yeah, there's a lot that you could do with it from a marketing perspective, but to properly respond to consumers and to properly respond to market dynamics, you need to go talk to your colleagues that are running the supply chain, so they could start to figure out where inventory needs to go for these vehicles based on the expected demand. So the exciting thing about and the important thing about first-party data is that once you start to use it and strengthen that muscle, you start to realize it has all of these adjacent benefits outside of the original domain or function where you decided to apply it. Right. So we talk to a marketing client that says, I want to use that data to do a retargeting campaign, and then suddenly you see an opportunity to change the way the enterprise is being operated because you have great customer data that can inform, in this particular case, the supply chain based on those market dynamics. Yeah. So kind of be agile and think about moving out in concentric circles from that original use case to other applications of that data, or how that data can be applied and the applications for it, because you never know when those market dynamics are going to change, and you need to have that agility within your data systems and within your business to respond.
And the culture in the company to look at that data and trust it and use it to make business decisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can't just be one person who's running down the halls saying I figured something out. Yep. It needs to be the culture of the company. I mean, there's really no other way of saying it, that we're going to make data-based decisions and have that go throughout the entire organization. Really important.
Yeah, and there's so much. You hear about it all the time, but just overloaded with data, and you can collect 1,500 data points on every transaction. That's great, but you may only need 5 of them. Right. And I think that's a huge move that's happening exactly.
There's a story I read. Actually, it's an automotive one. It was a luxury car maker. I'll make it up, Mercedes. And on their website, they were offering financing on the Build Your Car page, and they came up with the decision that they showed a different option when the price of the car you were building hit a threshold. When the car got to $120,000, something happened, and maybe you got reached out, contacted, things like that, and the campaign was a flop, and they couldn't understand why. And then they realized that it was because the people who were building cars like that were 15-year-old kids building their dream car, and they were adding everything they could. And when they looked at the data for the people who ultimately bought a car, it was really about $30,000 less, right? So that's it. You got to trust the data.
Right.
You know,
Right,
so.
and that's the other thing too. When we were talking yesterday, Matt, I know you had a couple examples where it not just goes, I would say correlates to marketers, but it extends in different business units, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a lot of our clients, not obviously the supply chain example that I just mentioned, but another important one, like particularly for anyone that's in the digital commerce, e-commerce business, is thinking about how you can leverage your first-party data to really understand customer lifetime value. And you can incorporate fraud information into that, because it's hard to say you're a high lifetime value customer if you're also a fraudulent customer, but there's overlap between marketing and fraud applications in that particular case. But where I'm going with this is making sure in that example of customer lifetime value that you can go over and talk to the pricing department and say, hey, we're able to identify on our digital properties, this is the behaviors that a high lifetime value customer exhibits. Can we change the price for the product, right? Because the digital commerce team often doesn't have the power to do that, particularly in larger organizations. So being able to say to the pricing department, we need to do this, or the pricing part of the organization, here's how we're going to make the decision based on this customer lifetime value metric using your first party data, empower us to be able to change our product pricing dynamically based on lifetime value.
And track the results of
and track the results all the way through to show that it's actually working to drive that higher lifetime value, that you're ultimately investing in those kind of activities to drive that. Another example is being able to look at what your high lifetime value customers want in terms of the products or the services that you're offering, and then work with the people that design those products and services. It can't be a situation where you've identified high value customers and say, hey, we want to tailor the product, and it's the old Henry Ford line. You can have a Henry Ford joke. If you can have any color Model T that you want as long as it's black, you need to be able to change the product in some way, configure it in a different way based on the needs of those high lifetime value customers. But to Greg's point, you go back to the data to say, we're justified in asking to do this because we believe that it is going to drive deeper relationships with our customers and more revenue for the business. Here's our plan to show you how that's going to happen and how we measure and track that based upon these insights. So kind of, again, think about pricing, product, promotions, the advertising, all of the things, all of the levers that you can pull on as a business to drive more value with the customers that you have today and those that you want tomorrow.
And entirely new services too.
Yeah.
I mean, you realize all of your customers are, they have college-age kids or sending kids to colleges. What other services could you offer that are relevant to kids that might have dorms, things like that, right? It's just, data's great, man. You want it. You want as much as you can get.
I was leveraging the exact same first-party data, that was being used for customer lifetime value, and after some ideationing and brainstorming with a large financial institution, they were trying to move towards banking and getting customers on their applications. They want a new app, they want engagement on their new app that they're going to, and they want to be very targeted in that first go around where they say, okay, well, let's make sure that our release of this app is impactful and that it hits the mark that we want it to. That exact same first party data that was being used for customer lifetime value, for fraud and risk, can also now be used for saying, okay, well, we know that they were using e-wallets. We knew that they have 4 unique mobile devices. Now that's a risk signal, but that also can tie into saying, well, if you have 4 unique devices and you're a good customer, you know your way around the mobile space, and that you have a lot of digital engagement, and the campaign was very effective. So just looking at the data holistically and not siloing yourself, but like you guys were saying is, well, where are we trying to go? And is there data that already exists? And it probably does, most likely. It's usually the case to get there. And so, I think there's a lot to be said about being very targeted in your first party data approach and being specifically into some of the attributes too that you're looking at.
Yeah, and I would give my own perspective too from the fraud lenses. Well, gosh, we're making assessments up front when these people land on websites, they sign up for accounts, all the fun stuff that you can do with different merchants, how they set up different campaigns, right? So, and then we're tracking the results. So now you have results from the good ones that are signing up for an account and they're loyal to you. Maybe they enrolled into a subscription. Well, gosh, that's a good customer. It resulted into 3 recurring payments. Okay, well, now I've got a bucket of those customers. And then as well, on the inverse, what we do is stop the bad guys. So it's, hey, now the outcome was, well, gosh, they wanted a refund, they were unhappy, or maybe they had a stolen credit card, what have you. It's, now I can identify that bucket and say, well, gosh, let's kick them over to a different campaign, make it easy for them to check out, move on, what have you, or maybe even blacklist them. And you can start allocating resources on the marketing side into the first bucket that I mentioned. So that's always huge, and I imagine, Greg, that's kind of your guys' strategy as well.
Yeah, I love talking about fraud. It's on the e-commerce side, there's a line, even if you're not selling on Amazon, you are still selling on Amazon. Somebody else is selling your product on Amazon. And I think even if you think you don't have fraud, you probably have fraud. You just don't realize it yet. And actually, fraud is how I got introduced to Kount in the first place. Here's the thing about fraud. It's devastating to your business. If you're a direct-to-consumer and you have e-commerce, you just shipped the product, right? You lost the product, it's gone. You're not getting paid for it, right? And you're dealing with credit card problems at this point, maybe brand problems, right? And you don't notice it right away. And that's what we find, is that we'll have clients come to us and say, why is our conversion rate 84% today? It's like, okay, there's a problem. You start to look at the customers and you realize that they're clearly getting hit with somebody who's just, hitting them with as many orders as possible. We had a client that had another site. It was on a different platform, and they were running credit cards through it just to see if the credit card was good. So it was decline after decline after decline, and then they'd find one that's good, and then they'd go off and use that somewhere. In itself doesn't sound too bad, right? They were just buying a simple product on the site. Here's the problem. They got a merchant processor bill for the auth attempts. It was like $50,000 just for the auth attempts. Forget the fraud, right? I mean, it was a devastating amount that they didn't know. They had no idea, right? So that's the problem with fraud, is that it comes in, you don't see it happening until it's quote unquote too late. And that too late means it's money out of your pocket, no matter what. So the faster you can hit that, right? The faster you can notice that, it just lets you get back on to your business, right? Mm-hmm. And back to what you're doing without that, the distraction of dealing with that incident, and it's always a distraction, right? Kind of how long it's been going on is how big of a distraction, that ends up being. The more you can minimize that, the better.
Well, and too, to sort of complete the swing to what we were talking about earlier with lifetime value of a customer, that's the part that we still need to talk about is, well, gosh, what the heck happened to the good customer? They got exposed, maybe a stolen credit card or what have you. Yeah. Now they're unhappy. Well, you want to retain those customers, like they're loyal.
Right,
so
right, exactly.
That's always crucial too.
Yeah. And another thing on the timing of it is a lot of times there'll be a product, let's say you have a more expensive product, certainly ripe for fraud, right? So a lot of times what will happen is you're running media, you're running Facebook ads or television ads, you get on the radar of people who are looking for fraud, right? Or looking to do fraudulent orders. And what will happen is a lot of times those expensive products, you have a multi-pay in there, right? So instead of a $200 product, it's 4 payments of $49.95. Well, here's the problem with that. So imagine fraud, okay? So you get that order and you ship out that $200 product. Well, you only got $50 for this thing, right? So now imagine that you just shipped out this $200 product that's running on TV, and you get hundreds of fraudulent orders, right? So that not only is that $50 gone, right? It's not just $50 for a $50 product. That $50 is gone for a $200 product that has gone out the door. And is lost. And what I've noticed when looking at situations of fraud that have happened with some of our customers is that they are increasingly difficult to eyeball. So we can see, there used to be back in the day, there'd be something obvious about these orders, right? There was just, as simple as the email address was all capitals, right? So for every one of the fraudulent orders, they had some script going, and it was just, you could see it. Or it's coming from a certain IP address or a certain set of IP addresses. And the sophistication now, you can't human eyeball this stuff anymore. There's just no way to do it. They're really, really good at it.
Yeah, they're running scripts.
Yeah.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, in your perspective too from Kount is awesome because it's fraud prevention, but then now again, we have that information. Yeah. You can package it up again for positive outcomes.
Exactly. And I think So kind of taking a step back, when you're pulling information, to Greg's point, you can't eyeball it. And that's why we have to lean so heavily on a network of data. So it's not just, well, this is a high-risk IP. It's not just, okay, well, we've seen this email before with a fraudulent transaction. Let's put it on a decline list. And if we ever see this email again, we're going to decline this customer. It's both the device information, it's what they've entered during that actual transaction itself. But I think by far the most important is those identity graphs. Well, we know that if someone is going to Dunkin' Donuts and they're trying to get a bunch of free coffees like we were talking about the other day, well, now if they're going to Crocs, right, and they're going to another one of an account within our network, one of our clients, we are now protecting that same merchant network. It is now not just that individual transaction, it is the network that we are leaning into, because we know when something is high risk in one area, applying some machine learning models to that, well, if it's high risk in one area, it's going to be high risk at another merchant. And being able to not well beyond eyeballing it, there's no way to just eyeball it on an individual transaction. Taking a step back, leveraging a network of 14 billion unique devices to say, okay, well, we're going to figure out where high risk and fraud is happening immediately, right? It's within 100 milliseconds. So it's very important.
So to add on that, so go to the fraud piece of this that I was talking about earlier, and why it matters, or how it relates to the personal, the PI. Imagine the four of us are here, and Shane, you'll be the fraud. So
I look like one.
It's the mustache.
Yeah.
So if the four of us order, so let's imagine Kount is running on your website, and the four of us order, and good order, fraud. For most people, myself included, would be thinking, okay, great, you found the fraud and got rid of the fraud. That's great. But what also happened is you got information about the good ones too, right? That information, we now have that information to do all of the stuff that had been talked about earlier. So the fraud protection is a piece of it, but I know it keeps being said different ways. It's all the same data, right? And that good data, which is the vast majority of your orders and your customers and visitors to the website, all of that good data, when leveraged, is powerful stuff for you to have. Right? So that's how it ties together. It's, yes, fraud keeps the bad guys out, but it also helps you glean more useful information about the good guys.
And Greg's making a really important point, that how you're using data can really differentiate you in the marketplace in ways that aren't necessarily about changing the price of a product or doing better, more personalized marketing. So if you're, host an e-commerce platform for your clients, you can differentiate yourself with the sophistication of your fraud detection and the data that's being used, and that's a way to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. On my end of the business, on the marketing side, I mean, think about what Apple has done. They have taken the collection of data and your ability to market as private as a way to differentiate their brand. Right? They're not talking about using that data to sell you the next iPhone. They're talking about how they are protecting your health information, right? Not how they're using that information to target you for a better exercise routine or a gym membership or this particular medication. They differentiate themselves on how they are treating that data, the control they give you over that data, and the privacy measures that are put in place. So there's a whole way to vast set of opportunities to leverage that information that goes well beyond a marketing campaign.
There's a line I heard years and years ago, and I'll munge it up a bit, and I was guilty of this, and I'm still guilty of this. Is somebody said personalization for most companies is simply personally annoying them. Right, so it's a pop-up that says, "Welcome back, Betty." Right, and for most of us are thinking, if I knew who it was that was visiting, what would I do with that information? And the reality is, a lot of people aren't that creative on what information they would get out of that, what they would do with that information, and it should be at that higher level than simply throwing in a placeholder for first name. right? It's like, okay, I know that this person's name is Betty. Welcome back, Betty. Would you like a promo code? And it's the same promo code that everybody gets, but you simply personalized it. That's not what it's about.
And if you look at consumer surveys, and there's been hundreds of them, assessing sentiment and taking the pulse of the consumer around how data is being used, one of the top annoyances for them is, well, I'm giving you all of this great information, but nothing has changed, right?
Exactly.
Why do I call the call center and you don't know that I just had the product delivered to my front door yesterday? Why do I have to tell the person on the other end of the line? I know you're collecting all of this information. So making sure that you are a good steward of that data. And oftentimes stewardship takes the form of, am I protecting it? Is it secure? Do I hash emails to protect those emails' identities when it's moving between and among systems? And that is certainly stewardship and legal compliance, as we've all said, is critical. But also how you're using that information to actually change people's lives for the better with it. And it doesn't have to be some sort of grand, noble mission, lofty mission. It could be something as, hey, we know that you buy this particular product from us every 3 months and thought you'd like to know that we're running low on inventory. You might want to buy it now, right? You're making their life better with that data, making things easier for them, being more relevant. So there's a lot of exciting things like that you can do with that data.
Yeah. And there's a level of personalization. It doesn't have to be as granular as, hi, Alex Hamilton is coming back. I was working with a client from a fraud perspective where we actually identified that they had a growing Portuguese-speaking segment of their customers, because we could pull that through device ID and we can see that, and they said, wow, maybe we should start doing some more bilingual video game marketing. And they did, and it worked out very, very well. And that was from the fraud data itself, but it was personalization at a level where they said, okay, well, we have a lot of customers who don't speak English, and they're forced to go through our online applications and just work their way through the English. But let's start making some Portuguese. Let's translate some of our content, and it worked out very well for them. So even personalization as, okay, well, we have some new market segments and some market demographics that we aren't targeting, but maybe we should be. And we should personalize and personalize an experience, even if it's just in a micro neighborhood. That can be very helpful too.
Yeah, and I like Matt's example of utilizing compliance with Apple, because it goes back to the personalization. The more isn't always the better, right? Yep. So you get the opportunity to listen closer to your customer to say, well, gosh, from a market standpoint, maybe not a personal standpoint, from a market standpoint, well, right now, people really care about compliance. Maybe not so much about the features, so don't vomit up a bunch of features on me. Maybe lean more into the compliance. The overall brand vision for you guys is so crucial, I'd say, to really, when you acquire a customer, they stay longer because you actually listen to them, right?
So I'll give an example of one of our clients of getting information from a customer. It doesn't totally apply because this isn't something you would know from a set of data that's available, but they have a physical fitness product that happens to be low impact, and all of their marketing, their whole story of the site, the TV commercials, everything they do was about fitness, and it was about losing weight and getting healthy and exercising. If you were to read their website, if you were to go listen to their commercial, that is the impression you would get, that it was a fitness device. When they read their product reviews, they realized it was all people who had knee surgery, and they were picking this because it actually made it better. The recovery time was lessened, and that doctors were recommending it. And it was, low impact, no impact, but you have the same cardio. So they changed everything. They looked at that data, and it happened to be reviews instead of points of data from a system, but it fundamentally changed the entire message of the company. And if you look at the website now, no mention of lose weight and get in shape and New Year's Eve. And it starts with a big quote from a customer about how my knees have never felt better, right? So that's the kind of attitude of any of that personal information that you can get from a customer. Use it in a way that's meaningful for your company, for your product.
We worked with a client years ago, a hotel in Vegas, and similar story. They were rethinking how they were positioning their property, and they were doing all the things that a hotel does. Like, we have great great location, great fitness room, great restaurants, and did an analysis of reviews of the hotel on TripAdvisor, and what a lot of the reviews were about how certain bank of rooms had a great view of the water feature at the Bellagio. Yeah, and they never talked about that. Yeah. They never talked about that in any of their promotional literature. But scanning, in that case, that wasn't first-party data. That data was owned by by TripAdvisor, but still the ability to use that information to better tailor their marketing messages. And then sometimes you discover in the data that there's things about your product that you don't want to advertise. Yeah. You rarely hear. I've never seen an ad for Gatorade. Hey, had a rough night, party a little bit too much. Why don't you take some Gatorade and help with that rehydrate? Like no, they know how that the product is used for that particular purpose, but they want to identify themselves as athletic performance and things like that. And so you can just see all of these interesting things. But because you at least know that, you have that information, you can then think about how you react to it or don't react to it in certain instances.
Exactly.
You had anything on that? Or?
Yeah, I would say that, well, actually, I'd loop you in on this a little bit, because I think that from a marketing perspective, we keep talking about using fraud data for marketing, but to your point, if you're marketing in the wrong way, if you're saying, hey, you're going to lose 10 pounds, and they don't lose 10 pounds, that same data comes to what you do, Shane, on the dispute side.
Yeah, I mean, when you have more of a focus on can we capture more revenue because now we have better insights into our customers, you open yourself up for more risk, right? So what we've tried to say is, okay, where does the rubber meet the road, and where does the most amount of risk with the most amount of opportunity, where does that point meet? So where we try to, I would say, be an extension of a marketing team is, well, gosh, okay, can you tell me what the next promotions are so I can start to understand from a fraud and risk standpoint, okay, well, I know this, if you give me this example, if you give me this strategy, I can ballpark it pretty much what's gonna happen from a fraudster standpoint, and I can start to make adjustments and help the business on that side of the house, because at the end of the day, if too many fraudsters get through, right, Greg, you get shut down, and you can't do anything anymore. So it's a great point. And I would say too,
fraud. I mean, just chargebacks.
100%.
I mean, you'll lose your merchant processor account.
Yep.
No matter how big you are, they don't care.
Yeah, and then you're at the point, well, gosh, now I can only offer a customer to pay me via a wire or an ACH. Yeah. I've never done it, so I wouldn't be buying goods.
In e-commerce, you're dead in the water.
Yeah,
I mean,
you're dead.
It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess putting a bow on things, it's data. A lot of it. From your guys' perspective, it's how do you utilize the correct data and implement something like this, right? So,
from my perspective, we advise our clients work in horizons of sophistication. Think about Horizon 1, what are the key use cases that you want to be able to activate against with that data, be it from a fraud perspective or from a marketing perspective. I want to do better retargeting. Okay, great, that's Horizon 1. What data do I need to collect there? What systems need to be in place to go activate against that information, and then start to move out across those horizons until you get to that point of sophistication that is justified for your business. But as you move from each of those horizons, always be cognizant of socializing, measuring, and recognizing and realizing value. So before you go to that next horizon, ensure that you have the telemetry in place, the measurement in place to say, I'm using data, I'm changing things about my business, which there's cost associated with that. Here's the results, and here's what that means to me in terms of the return on that investment, and then go to the next stage. Because these are going to be, in some cases, OpEx, in other cases, CapEx for the business that you have to invest in and justify why you're doing that, to your shareholders, to your owners of your business, to yourself if you're the chief executive officer of the organization. And so making sure that you hardwire the data and the tech to the use cases. How do you want to use it? And then progress in sophistication but ensuring all along the way that you have an opportunity to recognize and measure the value of those efforts in the way that you're decreasing your fraud detection rates over a predetermined benchmark, or improving customer lifetime value based on more personalized experiences leveraging data. So think in horizons and in stages, and think about value realization and always aligning the tech, the data, the people, the process to the use cases that you want to drive.
Anything on that?
My turn?
Yeah.
Mine are going to be with, unfortunately, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, so sorry. I think everybody should have fraud protection. I just think it's cost effective, and it should always be there. I think waiting until it happens is always not worth it, right? So that's one. So takeaway, at least understand that fraud really does happen, and it really can happen to you. The reality is you're not going to get pickpocketed probably walking down the street here, right? There are problems that happen in the world, but they don't happen to you. Fraud is probably going to happen to you at some point. So I'm a big advocate for that. I just think it's easy and it's cost effective. So that's one. Two is the PI data. Walk out of this room understanding that you do have that data already for your customers, and you are legally responsible for it, and that just needs to be on your radar, because times are changing, right? There's example or an analogy I give is ADA compliance, right? So it's Americans with Disability Act, and when you have a website, it has to be screen readable. Right? So a screen reader has to understand everything that's on the website, so if somebody is visually impaired. And that's not just, the text and the words, it could be just the contrast on the button, right? Maybe the letters on the button are yellow and the button is blue and there's not enough contrast. So even if you're not completely blind and you just have limited vision, you can't tell what's on that. And if a screen reader has a problem with that, repeating the words back, reality is, we have clients that have ADA compliance lawsuits against them on websites that to you and me, we would be that, of course, it's a perfectly fine website. It's all clearly readable. And a lot of these lawsuits are trolls that are literally just hitting site after site after site to find one that fails, and they will file a lawsuit against it in the hopes of settling it before the lawsuit happens. And we see it happen. I mean, it happens every few months. And every time, it is just a hassle for the company. It's go through every website now and make sure every single page, and you have to go back and do it. Same thing is going to happen, right, with people who are saying, delete my data, and if you don't really delete it, right, and they're going to find out that you didn't delete it because they're going to use a unique email address, right? They're going to try to test your process. And when it fails, they're going to do a lawsuit. So having that kind of control is super, or understanding of that new reality, I think is really important for us, because I think the smaller the company, the less you think about that kind of stuff. And I think none of us can get away with thinking that it's not important, and it is.
Yep. Closing comments?
Yeah, I would say just in the data space as a whole, the thing I see a lot and very, very commonly is knowing what type of data you have today. So throughout your entire network, it's fraud and risk teams have their data assets that they're working with. Marketing teams have theirs. Operations has their teams. And just communication between each one of those departments, a lot of times it's not happening. And if it was happening, whether you're looking for a retargeting campaign, personalization, even a fraud and risk, from a fraud and risk perspective, those data silos are creating a lot of issues in this space. And if you can really break those down, even if just through communication internally, even if you're not putting it all into a Snowflake environment, even if you're not putting it into a single data room or a Salesforce, you can still have communication around what data assets you have that other departments may or may not know about. And then you can actually create real initiatives based off of those. You can say, okay, well, with our fraud data and our marketing data combined, and throwing third-party data in there as well, maybe you're enriching it with some third-party data that marketing already has as well. That can not only help your marketing strategy, but it also can enrich your fraud strategy as well, even outside of Kount and even outside of some of those solutions that you currently have. So I think just my closing comments are knowing what data you have throughout cross-department and throughout your entire organization that you can use for a variety of use cases.
Sweet. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Questions, right? Yeah.
Silvano? Nope, we got one right up front.
Awesome. I'm Clark from Blockboard. What I found most fascinating about this panel was the specific examples you guys were giving on how first-party data can be used to shift business directions and real business decisions. I'd just like to spark another conversation. Could you give maybe one more like specific example, maybe a client you've worked with, or maybe Greg in your own business of, again, how data has shifted the direction? I remember, Matt, earlier you mentioned price and maybe navigation to a website, just to throw some bones to you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. We ran it was a hotel aggregation business, not the one that you're probably thinking of. But we had some great data on certain visitors to the website were clearly interested in the amenities at the hotel. Like they were. How do we know that? Because they had a big inventory of images on their website where these properties were featured. So you could look at that browsing behavior. Where were people spending time on the website? How were they looking at that room configurations and things like that? And we discovered that there was a certain segment that really enjoyed a nice hotel bar, and that's my kind of person. I sympathize with that person. And so we ran an experiment. We took that data and we ran an experiment where we worked with their web design team to put in an image carousel on the website. So when a visitor that we'd identified, because they came from a certain channel or a certain tactic, was likely to be interested in the amenities, in particular the hotel bar, scrolling through that image carousel was a picture of the bar if that hotel had won an award, because there was an award that this hotel had won for best hotel bar in Europe or something like that. So we took that data, ran that experiment. When we saw visitors on the site that we knew were going to be interested in that, we split the traffic, A, B. Some didn't get the image or the award notification of the best hotel bar, others did, and then we looked at the difference in booking rate for that particular property based on that information, and we saw that personalizing it based on that data increased the likelihood to book and ultimately drive room revenue. So like looking at that data, and again, kind of going back to thinking about how do I change, in this particular case, it was the website experience based on that information, and then running an experiment to validate that it was true before you scaled that experience across all of their digital properties. So very like practical example.
Anyone else? Hotel bar people represent.
That would work on me.
Thank you, guys. A round of applause for these guys. Really appreciate it. Well done. Join us back here in about a half hour. I'll be moderating a group talking about the future of media measurement. Sounds really visionary. We'll see you in about a half hour. Thanks.